Welcome to Elite Stories, where history comes to life. Subscribe and journey through time with us. Now, let's dive into today's story. In England, there was an old king called Edward, a gentle, pious man who disliked the trouble of governing and who left his brother-in-law to rule the country while he himself spent his time in praying and in reading good books and going to church. Harold, Earl of Wessex, the king's brother-in-law, was one of the most able men then living, a true Englishman, wise and honorable. The people of England loved and trusted Harold, and as Edward had no children to succeed to the throne, they hoped that after his death, Harold would become their king. On the other side of the strip of sea which divides England from France, there lived at this time a very proud and ambitious man, William, Duke of Normandy. William was descended from a great pirate who had come from the north many years before and had compelled the King of France to give him part of his dominions for himself and his followers to settle in. Ever since then, this part of France has been called Normandy, and the descendants of these Northmen are living there to this day. The pirate was made a duke, but his great-grandson, William of Normandy, wanted to become a king. William's father had been a friend of King Edward of England, and when he was a young man, William came from Normandy to spend some weeks at the court of England. In after years, William declared that during this visit, Edward had promised that he, and not Harold, should be the next king of England. If Edward really made this promise, he must have known that he was undertaking what he had no power to fulfill. For the English people had the right of choosing their own king, and they did not wish to have a proud Norman rule over them. But William had made up his mind to be a king, and he was a man who never let anything stand in the way of what he wanted. One day, Earl Harold went sailing in the English Channel when a storm arose and drove his vessel out of her course. Night came down, thick and foggy, and the captain did not know where they were. All remained on deck, keeping an anxious lookout, and in the darkness the vessel suddenly struck. Before them, they could see some masses of rock, and the men had just time to scramble out before the little ship filled with water and sank. The unlucky pleasure-seekers found themselves clinging to a little rocky islet which would scarcely afford them foothold, and all night they remained there, drenched with rain and spray. At daybreak, they were able to make out the coast of France, not very far away from them. By the side of the reef lay their little vessel, half in, half out of the water, with a large hole in her side. There was nothing that they could do but wait until someone should see them from the shore and come off with a boat to rescue them. In a little while, Harold and his men saw a stir upon the coast. Men were coming and going, looking towards the rock and then running to fetch other men. After a while, a party came down to the beach, launched a boat, and rowed towards the wreck. How thankful were the hungry, shivering castaways to get into the boat and be rowed ashore by these sturdy Norman French fishermen. They entered one of the cottages, and as they were warming themselves before a blazing fire, the door was suddenly burst open, and a man in a shining coat of mail stood in the doorway. Behind him were grouped a dozen or so of stout men at arms. "Aha," said the mail-clad knight, looking around him with restless, glittering black eyes. "If I am not mistaken, it is a great man whom the wind and waves have done me the honor to waft to my shores. I am Guy, Count of Ponthieu, and you, if I am not mistaken," he said to Harold, "are Earl Harold, brother-in-law to the King of England." "I thought so," muttered Harold as he gravely inclined his head in answer to the Count. "Our troubles are only beginning. This is not a fitting spot in which to receive the kinsman of King Edward of England," said Guy in mock courtesy. "I must trouble you, sir, to come to my poor dwelling, where I hope a short stay may be rendered as pleasant as possible to yourself and your followers." Harold groaned in spirit as he realized that the Count was going to keep him in prison in the hope of getting a ransom for him from King Edward. With these sturdy men-at-arms in the doorway, it was no use for the unarmed Englishman to try to resist. "My poor countrymen," said Harold to himself. "I wonder how much money he will force them to hand over before he consents to give me up." It grieves me to think of the good English gold which will go to the enriching of this greedy hawk. And how is the kingdom going to be governed in my absence? Alack, the day! The count's dark, mocking face was all aglow with triumph as he led his prisoner where some horses were ready waiting for them. After a short ride, they were in the courtyard of the grim, frowning castle of Aonthieu, with the drawbridge raised behind them. You will allow some of my men to go to England and tell King Edward that I am here, said Harold to the count. Once more, Guy smiled his mocking smile. I was going to ask the whole party to accept my hospitality for a few weeks, he said. His Majesty of England will be the more pleased to welcome his brother-in-law after he has lacked tidings of him for a spice. Harold fumed with anger and indignation. He saw that Guy meant to keep the king and his own family in ignorance of his fate in order that they might be more eager to ransom him once they heard that he was still living. But one day, Guy, Count of Ponthieu, was in a very bad humor. He strode up and down the courtyard with an angry scowl upon his handsome, haughty face, muttering to himself and reading a letter which had been brought to the castle by a mounted messenger. His mailed boots made a noisy clattering upon the pavement, and the men at arms felt that it would be safe to keep at a respectful distance that morning. Thanks for watching Elite Stories. If you enjoy this journey through history, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned. The next part is coming soon.